We're going to take up House Bill 17 by Chairwoman Emerson. Ms. Lowry, if you'd please read in the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 17 by Representatives Emerson, Amade, and Boyer amends provisions of the Election Code to provide for a party primary system of elections for certain offices, including providing for nomination of candidates for general election by party primary elections and related provisions.
Ms. Emerson on your bill.
All right.
Representative Emerson on your bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. Thank you all for being here today. I know that there's been a whole lot of discussion on this bill, and most of you have come to talk with me and had questions and everything. And so I'm going to introduce, obviously, what the bill does, and I look forward to any type of back and forth questions that you have. And I certainly know there's lots of people here to express their opinions, and appreciate that. So as you heard the governor reference in his speech yesterday, this is something that we are looking to do in the state of Louisiana is a closed party primary system. This is something that most states do have some type of party primary mechanism in their elections. Louisiana is considered obviously a jungle primary state. We're pretty different in that regard, and hey, we're different in a lot of regards, but we're pretty different in the way that we do that. So there are a couple of other states, namely California and Washington, who do a similar, somewhat jungle but top two situation. I think Washington actually might have more than top two at this point, but I don't recall that specifically, but and then also Alaska and Maine have a ranked choice voting system. And so there's about 5 states right now that don't have some type of actual party primary like this. Most other states do, so that's what we're looking to move to. So what this bill does is actually totally close the primary system. So Republican Party primary, Democrat Party primary, whatever, major party primaries would occur for this year. Certainly understand logistically what we're doing here. And so this year it would occur in August. And it would be a plurality party primary election, which would mean the top vote getter advances to the general. And also the general election in November would be a plurality election as well. So that's what we're attempting to do for the congressional races, the federal races this year. There's no Senate race up in Louisiana, so it would just be the 6 congressional races. And then also in subsequent years, looking to do it for statewide, legislature, other state offices like BESI and PSC, and judicial races from Supreme Court to Court of Appeals to district judges. So that's basically what the bill does. Be happy to answer any specific questions that you have about the process.
Yeah, Representative Emerson, we have a couple of amendments that we have. Ms. Lowry, on those amendments.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We have set 36241, and they're available online for those watching outside the building. Some of which are technical, but we provide for a definition of party affiliation and affiliation with a political party. And we specify that means the affiliation designated in the state voter registration system. We add a extended deadline for the turning in of nominating petitions to 90 days prior to the opening of the party primary office qualifying period. We have some, again, technical amendments relative to the withdrawal of candidates. We include if a candidate is disqualified through an election contest, relative to if only one candidate remains after withdrawal and now or disqualification. And we change the election date, the primary election date, from the last Saturday in August to the 3rd Saturday in August, and qualifying period would begin instead of June 26th on June 5th and would end on June 7th instead of June 28th. And the rest of those are technical.
Members, we worked on these amendments. Chairwoman Emerson and Secretary of State worked on these amendments with the Secretary of State's office to get it in proper posture. I'm going to go ahead and offer up this amendment set 36241. Is there any objection to adopting these amendments? Hearing no objection, these amendments are adopted. Representative Emerson, back on your bill. We have a couple of questions. Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Representative Emerson.
Good morning.
I have a couple of specific questions, and if you don't mind, I'd like to refer you in your bill to page 5.
Okay.
And my questions deal with lines 13 through 23. Essentially, what this is doing is talking about the non-affiliated person and how that person gets to be on the ballot. My understanding is that this is, as written here, is by petition only. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are.
Okay. I think we might run into a bit of difficulty here because, for example, there are some people who have registered and their party registration is called independent, which I don't know if everybody who is registered independent realizes that that's a real party. They may think that they are registered as being non-affiliated with any party, but that would be a heading of no party as opposed to independent. So I know that there are certain thresholds that a party has to meet in order to be.
Yes, it is.
Well, I guess my question is
Yes.
there, are there enough people registered in the independent party to be recognized as a real party? I don't mean a real party, to be recognized as a party that might participate in this process?
Yeah, so there's a few different issues in that question, and I did ask Ms. Lowry to kind of be prepared to read the statute that's referenced in here about the designations of major parties and what all that means. The Secretary of State's office could certainly speak to that as well. So we had to put some parameters in there as far as what we mean by major parties and triggering these primary elections. And then certainly there is a provision that allows each individual party and their state central committees to decide whether or not they would like for unaffiliated voters to be able to vote in their primaries. That's left up to the individual parties themselves, because this is a true closed primary in this bill. And then as far as anyone else running in the general election, certainly have that provision in there for people to be able to qualify for the general election as, unaffiliated or other parties, things of that nature. The provision about the nominating petitions was put in there because certainly as you're going through the party primary process, I would say is a decently rigorous process and a strong vetting process for those candidates who are going to be in the major parties on the general election ballot. So I think that for anybody else who wants to be on the general election ballot, you certainly have to have a provision there. So that's why the nominating petition was chosen, because that is also somewhat of a vetting process for those people, rather than walk in
and qualify.
You actually have to go and talk with voters, much like the individuals running in the recognized parties would do in the party process, in the party primary process.
Well, could we hear from Ms. Lowry about
Yes.
the independent?
Well, about the statute referencing that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Lowry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, members. So for these provisions dealing with how candidates for party primary offices qualify, the provisions dealing with it distinguish how the party is recognized. So there's a statute. It's section Title 18, Section 441, and it goes through how different types of parties are recognized. The particular statute dealing with the parties who are affiliated with recognized political parties limits that to subsection C, which specifies, and I'm going to read the statute. A political party shall be recognized if any one candidate of the political party for presidential elector received at least 5% of the votes cast in the state for presidential electors in the last presidential election, or if one candidate of the political party for any statewide office received at least 5% of the votes cast for the statewide office in any primary or general election. And then it puts a cap. So if you become a recognized political party and then within 4 consecutive years you don't meet that qualification anymore, you would no longer be recognized. So my understanding is this, and I know that the Secretary of State's office could certainly correct me if I'm incorrect, but at this point, only the Democrat and Republican parties are recognized pursuant to that statute. They are the only ones in the state that have qualified for that. There are other recognized parties that would have been recognized pursuant to a different law dealing with affiliation of at least 1,000 voters and paying a fee, and filling out the paperwork and otherwise qualifying with the Secretary of State's. And so in Louisiana, we have recognized, as of today, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the Independent Party. Okay? And then there are other parties that exist. People have affiliated with other parties by virtue of filling out their voter registration cards and filling in the blank.
Okay, so those last parties that you read, Green Party, Libertarian, Independent, they are
not recognized.
because they haven't
as
received enough votes?
That is correct. They are
And-
not recognized pursuant to that 441C provision that I read.
Okay.
That helps you?
So, yeah, so that, meaning that would not trigger the party primary process.
So, right, just the two, okay. I don't know if this is, would make anybody else uncomfortable about having to get this petition signed. I don't even know what question to ask about that.
No, and I understand. Again, it is a provision put in there because, like I said earlier, the other party candidates would have gone through a rigorous vetting process in the party primary, and this is just to kind of level that playing field of a more rigorous process to get on the general election ballot.
What's the threshold? I think I read it in this bill. What's the
I
threshold?
think it's 1,000.
It's set out in the
I believe it's 1,000.
1,000. So 1,000 signatures in wherever you would be running. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And I did
Yes.
notice that the registrar of voters is the one who vets the signatures. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, but if we can bring the Secretary of State's office up here to factually answer that question, that would be great.
Someone from the Secretary. Landry. Good morning. Would y'all
Chairman.
please introduce yourselves?
I'm Nancy Landry, Secretary of State, and we have
Sherry Wharton
Hatsky.
Hatsky, Commissioner of Elections.
Welcome. Thank y'all.
Thank you. The threshold is 1,000, and the Registrar of Voters is the one who vets the petition.
you
The
go.
signatures in the petition.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Simple question. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh,
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I don't know if do you want them to stay up here? I don't know if anybody else has any.
You might want to stay up there for a little while. I got a feeling y'all are going to be needed.
Feel like that'd be good.
Representative Marcel?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Emerson,
Thank you.
for taking on this task. I do have some questions. As you know, I serve on appropriations, and so we passed the fiscal part that would address
Yes. I did see that this morning.
how we would fund this. And so a couple of questions came up earlier in that committee, and one of them being, in 2021, Senator Hewitt had a bill, and the fiscal note, I think, was $11 million. I think what we allocated on the other side was $8 million. So I'm trying to figure out where's the difference in it. That's one. And then secondly, do you foresee this as being broader and so costing us more dollars as the years go by? And what is your projection for 10 years? Because I know we got a lot of fiscal conservatives in the House, so I'm just trying to figure out where we are with it.
Yeah.
Well, I do appreciate your being concerned about our politics.
And Representative Emerson, too, just as a note, too, on your fiscal notes, we normally bring them out 5 years, 10 years. It's hard to predict 5 years, much less 10. But
I mean, Representative Marcel thinks I can predict the future, so I'm excited about that. But let me clarify on the bill that was passed out this morning and what that means. So that was a supplemental appropriation bill that funds the needs for this year. The $8 million you're referencing is for a statewide election, and that is because there's a bill that's been introduced that has a constitutional amendment possibility. So that's what the $8 million would be for. The other $5 million is a number that we arrived at in conjunction with the Secretary of State's office as far as prepping for the potential party primary in August that's in this bill. So that's what that would be for. So the $8 million is irrespective of this bill right now. The $5 million would be for this.
And I heard you talking to Representative Thomas about who would be qualified in terms of party. And as it stands right now, that would only be the Democrats and the Republicans. The other parties would not be able to participate in this election, in a closed party. Is that accurate?
They do not reach the threshold that is laid out in statute that we reference in this bill for qualifying to have a party primary.
Right. So
But the other, there is also a provision for unaffiliated voters that it's up to the individual parties themselves of whether or not they would like unaffiliated voters to be able to vote in their party primaries, in their closed party primaries. And then for the other voters, if they would like to have someone on the general election ballot, which of course everyone can always vote in a general election, they would use the petition nominating process.
Yeah, I think, there's some concerns about the veterans, many of whom vote independent and not on either side, and disenfranchising those voters in a close primary. And I think those are some of the concerns that I've heard. I told you when I saw you on the floor, I didn't have any fixed position on it, but I started to look at it and to study it. And so those are some of the concerns that I would have. First of all, the amount of money that it would cost us if it's going to cost us more. And then secondly, disenfranchising some of the voters that would not be able to participate. But I thank you for your work, Representative Emerson.
Chairwoman Emerson, in other states, do we have any sort of reported disenfranchisement with voters to where there are certain sectors of the voting population that feel disenfranchised from the voting system since most of the others are closed?
Well, and let's clarify. I don't want to say that most of the others are closed. Most other states have some type of party primary system.
Primary system. Thank you.
There is open, closed, semi-open, semi-closed. I mean, there's a variety of different ways to do it, but most states do have some type of party primary system. I'm not sure if any do anymore, but some even at one point had convention nominating process. And so it would be delegates to a state convention and they would nominate the person there. So there's a variety of ways. We feel that this is, or at least I do, my name's on the bill, that this is the way that we should go in Louisiana. Certainly after much conversation and debate and things of that nature. So that's, and as far as other voters in other states, I mean, I don't necessarily have any reports on that or not. I'm mostly concerned about what's going on here in Louisiana. But again, the other states have a variety of different systems. In the case of open party primaries, they don't necessarily have party registration, so people would go up on election day and vote in either the Republican or the Democrat Party primary. I'm not exactly in favor of that, because if you do have party registration, you have the parties in your state, and frankly, most people, I know there's been a lot of polls that have been talked about in this instance, but I think most people, when they're polled, and you say, do you feel like voters in another party should be able to influence the outcomes of a party primary? In those parties, they would say no, in a party that they're not registered in. So that's the reason we chose the system that we did.
Let me ask kind of a follow-up question too. I believe in the state we have over 600,000 people who are registered as no party, which is the ones that I think you build targets.
That's the correct number.
It's 650,000, give or take. If 662,000.
660 no party.
Yes.
Okay.
Each party in your bill is going to have the ability to include those folks to be able to vote. Is that correct?
That's correct. They will make that decision individually within their parties, yes.
Okay. So if the Democrat Party wants to allow those no party registrants to vote in the Democrat election, they'll have that opportunity. If the Republican Party wants to include them, they'll have that opportunity as well?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Couple other questions. Representative Carter.
I recall, I believe we did this before. How long ago was that, and why we stopped doing it?
So I believe that we did it in 2008 and 2010. And was, as was referenced yesterday in the governor's speech, several of our members of Congress who were there today went through that process. I certainly wasn't in the legislature then. Were you? You may have been. I don't know.
No, I was on the bench then.
Oh, you were on the bench at that point? So I was in college. Thank you, Representative Marcel. And so, I can't speak to the exact reasoning. I think that if memory serves me correctly, I don't want to speak out of turn. I believe that it was passed in one legislature, potentially under one governor, potentially, and I think maybe changed in a different legislature. So, as you know, we have 105 House members and 39 senators here, and everybody has their own opinions. So,
But apparently some leadership decided that it wasn't a good idea and stopped doing it.
somebody somewhere did.
Now, as I understand it, while the parties can permit the non-party and the independents even to vote in the election, they can't vote. Independents can't vote at all. The parties can't allow the independents to vote in their primary.
So, again, the party primary situation, if it's a true closed primary, the only allowance for unaffiliated voters, which would be no party, would be if the individual parties decided that they wanted unaffiliated voters to vote in their primary. Of course, everyone can vote in the general election, and
Okay,
that is obviously when you would
okay,
have
so-
your nominees and whoever else qualified by
So
petition.
the independents don't vote in none of the primaries.
In a primary, no.
Okay, because it's a closed
Because it's the
primary.
individual parties making those decisions of who they want their nominee to be for the general
So
election.
a candidate, an independent candidate, under this bill would have to get, for the general election, a petition signed or what? They have to get a
Yes.
petition signed by 1,000
Petition
people.
nominating
And
process.
Judge Carter, just to it's those who are registered with the independent party. So that's
Yes,
so
it's really difficult because since we do actually have an independent party in Louisiana, those are different than unaffiliated no party voters.
Okay, the no party voters to qualify for the general election, they have to get a petition as well?
No party voters would have to do a nominating petition, yes,
petition.
to be on the general election ballot.
So a Democrat or Republican don't have to worry about a petition. Just go up and qualify in the primary.
And run in a
and
party
run in
primary.
So
Yes.
you're assuming the reason why you're requiring I know some states, the independent and no party just go qualify for running the general election. And, but we doing it where they have to get a petition.
So I don't have the number. I do apologize, but there are other states that do this for qualifying for the general election. I didn't make it up out of thin air.
Because I understand that the party, the closed party folks would obviously have to campaign to try to get elected so they would meet people, but they don't have to get their signature. If you got to get a person's
Right, but they have to
signature-
campaign for it through a party primary.
That's right, and you got to go get a 1,000 signatures and bring it to the voters registrar's office and have that signature validated. So how much time you have to have it validated before you can for the general election? How much time would that independent candidate have to get their petition validated and approved?
Do you have the answer on that as far as the days?
We're working on that. We're working on that
Okay.
because redistricting affects the amount of time. So we're going to have that in an amendment.
Okay. Okay. My understanding is that redistricting right now is affecting some of that, so the timing needs to be nailed down, but we are working on it in an amendment.
And does the congressional delegation support this bill? And if so, do all of them support it? Some of them, or is it a mixed bag?
Look, I can't speak for every single member of the congressional delegation. There's certainly been a lot of communication out there and over the last few days. I know somebody sent me, I think Congressman Higgins came out and did an op-ed recently about it. I don't want to say on the record for sure. There may be some other people behind me who could bring some of that, but my understanding is that, I'll just say this. My understanding is that the congressional delegation in general is okay with this. But again, I mean, this is something the legislature is doing. I certainly respect their opinions and how they feel, and I would love their support for it. But this is a decision for the state legislature.
I just got the feeling that this legislation may be brought about. It's your bill, you handle the bill, but because of the congressional maps being changed, there's any relationship to why the delegation want to do something like this as related to changes in congressional maps to secure it to
My bill, on a personal level, my bill has no correlation to that. This is something that we are running because I'll say this. I mean, again, most states have some type of party primary process, like I've said before. And also on a congressional level, as you've probably heard us discuss here, we have an issue with our members of Congress when they have to go to a runoff situation, not being elected until December. I think Louisiana and Georgia are the only two states that have that problem. Georgia's even later, I believe, because they have a runoff provision for their general elections. And so, Louisiana having the jungle primary in November for Congress and then having the December elections where you could have multiple members of your congressional delegation getting there later. I mean, they lose seniority, they lose access to certain staff. I mean, it has been, I won't say it's this major explosive thing, but it's been a problem that has been conveyed. If you've spoken to your member of Congress about that, it's not a great situation. It's not ideal. I believe at one point last term, Chairman Stefanski looked at trying to see if the logistics of moving up the jungle primary so our members of Congress could win in November. The problem is that the provision in the jungle primary is that someone can actually win on that day. So you can't have, it's a federal issue. You can't have someone winning Congress in October or whenever the jungle primary be pushed up to. It has to be a winner in November. Correct. Right?
So-
Okay.
No sooner.
Yes, no sooner than November, the federal election day. So we can't have that. And so now we're forced into the situation, since our provision for our jungle primary is if someone gets over 50%, they are the declared winner in that race.
And I agree with everything you just said. And
I'm so glad.
I think Congress probably be a good idea to do this. Okay.
Well, that's what we're
But
doing this year.
Why are we doing legislators, all judicial elections, all statewide offices?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Any statewide or district office would have to do this. Mm-hmm. And
Yeah, so that's in subsequent years. Obviously the provision for this year in this bill is for the federal delegation, federal elections.
but
We
how
don't have
long?
a Senate race, so.
Okay, so how long would the Supreme Court and other folks have to do this?
So the effective date for everything else would technically be 2025.
Okay.
Of course, Ms. Haskey can speak to this, but we don't potentially have a ton of elections in 2025. It's not a heavy election year.
That's correct.
So really, most other things would start to take effect in 26 and 27, with the exception of any special elections you have.
So it wouldn't affect any mayor races.
No, the locals are actually out of this bill.
Okay.
Local
And
elections.
So the only bills election we probably have is maybe the Supreme Court, Congress. Mm-hmm. And so why we just don't make this a Congress bill for the Congress, for the federal election?
Well, look, I mean, this is what's included in that bill. Again, Congress is for this year and for all the other offices for the subsequent years. And that's just the overall feeling of what we wanted to do. And, if you think differently, I certainly respect that. And you can offer an amendment and we can vote on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairwoman Emerson, also just it hasn't been mentioned yet, but President Biden was elected in a party primary system, and President Trump was also elected in a party primary system. And here in Louisiana, it worked pretty smoothly on those.
Yeah, so we have presidential preference primaries, obviously, for president. So yes, our presidential nominees come from that process.
Thank you. Representative Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was mentioned a few minutes ago about the fiscal cost of this, and fiscal conservatives were certainly referenced. I would consider myself a fiscal conservative. I think my track record proves that.
I'd consider that you as well.
Oh, thank you very much.
Representative Marcel was really worried about us on that team.
I appreciate her concern. But my appreciation is that if something is fundamentally or structurally not working or yielding the best results, it is worth spending the money to correct those things. And so while I do consider myself a fiscal conservative, I think our system that we have right now, obviously certainly works, it functions, but is not yielding the best results for our state. And I think we can go through any number of statistics that prove that. And I think if you look at other states that are doing substantially better in rankings that I think all of us care about, one of the commonalities between those states is some form of closed primary. So to those that are looking at the numbers, like myself, I do think that is important, but I also think it's important to spend money where appropriate to address fundamental and structural changes. Another point, and I want to make sure I understand this correctly, there was a statement made about disenfranchising voters. My understanding is that this bill wouldn't do anything like that, that while every party would have the ability to select their own candidate, every registered voter in the general election is still going to have the ability for their vote to count. One vote for one person. So we're not talking about any system that would disenfranchise any voter, take away their ability to vote. We are simply looking at restricting the party's candidate to those made up of that party. And people could always re-register, choose not to be a part of a set party as they are now and vote.
That's correct.
In the general. Is that correct?
Everyone has the ability to register with a party of their choosing. And if they decide not to, they certainly have that ability as well. So this is about the party primary process of getting a nominee for these individual parties, and then certainly having everyone having the ability to vote in the general election. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your work on this and yours, Ms. Slander. I really appreciate the hard work you guys have put into this.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Carlson. And look, I'll speak to that as well. Certainly, there's no desire to just have gigantic inflated cost in any of this. We have certainly worked to try to build this in a way that it's not going to be massively significant cost to the state. I understand there's a fiscal note. I understand we have a supplemental bill to prepare and reprogram things in the Secretary of State's office to accomplish this. There will be some upfront costs, certainly. And look, I don't want to predict the future, but in the state of Louisiana, I think we have a lot of elections. I don't know what we're like compared to other states, but I think certainly we can look at some streamlining of some of those things down the road as well.
We have more elections in those states.
Vice
Secretary
Chairman,
Landry says we have more elections than most states.
Vice Chairman Lyons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Emerson, I know several things. The first is we're talking about the correlation between Louisiana and other states. And we use the statement that compared to those states, what they've done, I think the basis is on elections that passed and who was elected and what have you. But I want a little more specificity about the metrics of what the difference is. You can pick one of the states that you asked, two of them that you mentioned, but give me the numbers. I want to know the numbers that make a difference. If this system that we have now is performing at a level that's not up to what some people may think that it needs to, what are the numbers that support that? The numbers that we're talking about. Other than saying that a system is working better, or we elected someone, or we didn't, more specificity of what the numbers are there. We know that the cost is going to be a lot more than what we were assuming we're going to be spending. But when we talk about performance of the system itself, the correlation between one state and another, what does that mean?
I'm going to be really honest with you. I'm not sure what your question means.
Okay.
I don't mean to be ignorant, but I don't know if you're asking is certain election performance metrics. They may be able to answer that better. Again, this is a different way of doing things. This is what most states do. They have some type of party primary system. To my knowledge, we're the only state that has the exact system that we have. Again, I referenced Washington and California that have some similarities to what we do. But my understanding from research is that we're the only state that does it exactly like we do. Which, I mean, I guess everybody has their idiosyncrasies of what they do. But metrics, I would have to know exactly what you're asking me for. I don't particularly understand it.
Excuse me, I didn't mean to cut. What you said was they do exactly like we do it. So what is the difference? We already outlined, number one, that we talked about disenfranchisement, which is a debate that's going on exactly as to who have access, who doesn't. That's one piece.
I think I need a better definition
I'm
as far as disenfranchisement, because it's not like we're telling voters they can't vote in a general election. They certainly can. This is a party primary system where you're getting a nominee for each party according to the members of their party.
Okay, so let's get more. What makes it better?
What makes it
What makes it a whole lot better, what you're offering now, than what we actually have? I was going down the list of some of the issues, but I'll just stop. So just outline it. What makes it better?
Well, honestly, Representative Lyons, I think a lot of it is about fairness of having the members of that particular party choose their party nominee. I mean, right now, and if you look at least one of the polls I've seen, the vast majority of people, including independents, believe that members of that party should be the people choosing that party's nominee. So as far as better and metrics, I mean, that's an indeterminable answer, in my opinion, because this is about how you choose the party's nominee, having the party primary for those members of that party to choose their nominee to go into our general elections.
Okay, so
And then
there's no
everyone
metrics.
makes their choice in the general election.
Okay, so one of the concerns that I had from back home was with the actual process of the elections. I know we had an amendment here to do some of the dates, and I wanted to ask the Secretary of State about that particular piece. For that, with the different changes in the dates, how much more cumbersome or how much more streamlined will it become with those dates that we're changing? Is the first question, and the second part of it is outlining the fact. I know that you said that the locals will be left out of it, but when we talk about organizing and performing elections, those are done at every level. And one of my home concerns were the actual staffing of putting these elections on, the cost of it. And I know, Sherry, you talked about the cost of it earlier in other meetings. So how would that make the difference with the extra number of elections versus that piece that we're there and the dates? That's a compound question.
Okay, I'll try to answer it. Thank you, Representative Lyons. And let me just say that our office is not taking a position on whether we should have closed primaries or open primaries. We're willing to do whatever the legislature wants. Our concern is that we can do it in a way that ensures the integrity of the election, and the time frame is such that we're not jeopardizing the security of our elections. And so that's what we're focused on, and we also want to make sure we have the resources to do it. And so we estimated that the amount of money that we would need in this fiscal year for both the constitutional amendment, which is another bill, and the party primary, which is an additional election in the fall, would be close to $13 million for this fiscal year, and then $17.4 million for next fiscal year. And every year that we have another additional election, it's approximately $10 million. So it's around 7.2 million in direct election costs and $3 million in indirect costs. And so that would be a recurring cost as well. But does that answer your question? I'm not sure if
That
that was.
answered that question as far as that piece that's there. I'm just trying to get to the answer from what I was asked to ask the question about, and that's one of our issues is from home, from our clerk, is just getting staff in there to
Oh, yes,
perform these elections.
we do have a concern about the fatigue of commissioners and not being able to find commissioners who could work that many elections. And so, that's something we're working with the author on to try to find a way to incentivize more commissioners to work and to get them to work more elections. So we have been working with them. I will say we haven't had a whole lot of time to digest this bill because we just got it last night. And as you all know, the devil's in the details. And so we want to make sure that we can execute this and execute it with integrity and preserve the security and integrity of our elections. And so we haven't really had the opportunity to go through it very, very carefully and make sure that that we're thinking of everything, and we really want to do that to make sure that this very important presidential election is not impacted in a negative way. So we're still working with the author on that. But we have discussed commissioner pay as a potential way to incentivize commissioners to work an extra election.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that we've discussed.
Okay. And thank you very much for that detailed piece. And I'll yield now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Lyons. Representative Weibel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Emerson, thank you for bringing this, and this is an important discussion. And I think this process would have made a positive impact in my race in particular with that. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. Asking for a little grace in advance as a freshman trying to catch up with all of this. Can you help me understand the concept of plurality?
Plurality.
And what does that look like, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so you have a couple of different kind of elections. You have a plurality election. You have a majority election. So plurality, and then there's also some in between as far as thresholds of winners. So plurality in this sense would be the highest vote getter.
Is there a threshold in that, or it's just
There's not a
whoever's-
threshold in the bill currently.
Okay,
It is highest vote getter.
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Representative Weibel. Representative Newell?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning,
Good morning.
Representative Emerson and
Yes, I think it's still
Secretary
morning.
Landry
Yep.
and Ms. Haskell. Great to see you all once again. So, referencing the statement that Judge Carter made yesterday, I heard the same information that we're considering these closed primaries, I guess, as a one-off or a handoff for Congress being in favor of this second minority majority district. And I'm not saying that that is your motivation for bringing this bill, but I am saying that this is information that I heard that the
Can you
congressman
speak to
asked
heard
for
you
this.
who you heard that from?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Just
Just asking.
gonna go with that. And my opinion was the same as Judge, is that we impose these closed primaries on Congress and above instead of state and above. Particularly since this is not an issue that this special session was called for. The courts asked us to come in a special session to look at our congressional maps that we have.
Well, the
failed
courts don't call us in the
that-
special session.
So they asked us. So you can overtalk me as much, but the
I'm sorry.
The
I love you.
opinion of the courts asked us to come back into a special session, and the governor did call it because the court asked for us to redraw this map and get the second minority majority district that we failed to do twice previously. So, yesterday it was stated that we didn't have a trial on the merits, but the trial on the merits would be scheduled on February 5th or March 25th, depending upon what kind of maps we come out of this session with. And in this 8-day session, I do not, in my humble opinion, I do not believe we should waste time or spend time on a matter that deserves much more time than we are able to dedicate to it, because we only have 8 days. And you've seen how spirited the conversation has been so far. And Secretary Landry, you're not the only one that just received this bill yesterday. Those of us who are sitting here debating it and have to vote on it only received this bill yesterday. And this deserves to have much more time spent. Also, in discussions yesterday, I had the same concerns as Representative Carlson, that the closed primaries, well, I didn't have these concerns, but it was stated that these closed primaries would set this state on a positive course. And I guess bringing Louisiana up to speed with other states such as South Carolina. However, when I looked to see what it was that was making South Carolina perform so much better, closed primaries were not on that list. The list did include, however, an investment in education and health care. And on that list, it also included the fact that the citizens in that state had wage increases, and their wage increases in income had started to outpace the national inflation. So I did share, and I'll tell you who I talked to. I spoke to our illustrious governor and our speaker and asked them that and I stated that we should put more focus on having a statewide increase to our minimum wage. Now to my questions. Secretary Landry, you did state, and your predecessor has stated in the past, that Louisiana does have more elections than most.
That's correct.
Would these closed primaries happen on the same day? So would the Democrat and Republican closed primaries both happen on January 20th?
In this bill right now, they do happen on the same date. and it's in August this year, and it just vaguely says March after that. So we are working with them on more specification on that.
Okay, that's good because we, as you stated, we've been having challenges with our poll workers, and as we've seen in the past, and we've heard in the past, they're overworked, they're underfunded and underpaid, and then they're under attack. So I'm glad that you are considering the increase to their wages to incentivize
They
more
certainly
people.
deserve it.
They definitely deserve
We
it.
couldn't put on the elections without them, and they make very little money to do
Very
it.
little money,
We
and
very
then
much
we passed
appreciate
that.
them.
We can't even bring them donuts and snacks anymore. So now they got to fund that themselves too. So I'm glad we're going to increase their pay. And my questions are all over the place because I've been listening and reading the bill. I see that we are increasing the fee. Why are we increasing the fee for the presidential candidates? Is that
was something that was
just
put
something
in
we
the
need to
bill.
do?
It just, yeah, it's not, it doesn't trigger any type of situation because the fee's going to the Secretary of State's office, so it doesn't.
Okay, I'm just
Yeah.
was asking that, so it's just something that's about time that it happens. Earlier in the statements, Ms. Lowry referenced a fee when we were speaking about the petition for a independent candidate or a non-affiliate candidate to get on the ballot. They would have to get a petition signed, and then she mentioned a fee. I don't know if that would be the qualifying fee, or is that an additional fee? And maybe I should ask Ms. Lowry since she's the one that said it, but I thought Secretary Landry would know.
There's a qualifying fee that the Republicans or Democrats could pay, and they would get on the ballot just by paying the qualifying fee.
Yes.
All other parties and non-affiliated, in order to be a candidate on the ballot, would have to get the nominating petition. They
So-
couldn't just pay a fee under this bill the way it's currently drafted.
So there's no petition fee. There's no additional fee that they have to pay to the
I don't-
registrar of voters to certify
think
those.
so.
Okay, I just wanted to make
That's
sure we were not putting an extra burden on someone who decided not to be a D or an R. They just have to take another step, but it's not a financial burden. That's thank
My
you.
understanding.
Okay, thank you. And we discussed about there being 284,000 veterans in this state currently who are registered as independents. And some of my colleagues don't want to see it as disenfranchisement, but I do. I see this as another hurdle to veterans not being able to participate in all of the elections. And
Do you mean they're no party or independents?
independence is
Because
what
we only have
I'm reading.
134,120 registered in the independent party.
That's
but then
still
the
too
no
many.
party is 662,879.
That's a lot of people that would not have the opportunity to participate in all elections. And being the daughter of two veterans, they do fight for the rights for us to trample on other folks' rights. But then you have 22% of the African Americans in this state who would once again be in a position to feel like they're not able or being allowed to participate in all elections. Representative Emerson, and like I said, my questions are all over the place because I've been listening and reading and just trying to catch up, and this is a lot to digest. This isn't a long bill, but it is too long to have just received this last night. You was about to answer something.
Yeah, you're certainly asking me the questions, and I'll be happy to answer any of them. But I just wanted to reiterate, if someone chooses to register in a party, that is obviously what triggers them to be able to vote in the party primary. As of right now, and these two ladies can certainly correct me, but in the presidential preference primary, I don't believe either party has allowed anyone not registered in their party to vote in the presidential preference primary in quite a long time. Is that correct? Or ever?
That's correct.
So right now, only if you're registered in that party can you vote in the presidential preference primary, which is about to occur in March. So it is the exact same situation, and the parties still have that choice to make of whether or not they would allow unaffiliated voters to vote in their party primary. So it's the exact same.
And I'm glad you made that statement because that goes with my original statement that I believe that this should only apply to Congress on up and not to us. So I'm glad
So you like it
stated
on the
that.
congressional level?
And yes.
Okay.
Not us. And also, I don't appreciate, I'm not going to say I don't appreciate it. I have concerns about the persons who would be included in this party primary, particularly the office of the Justices of Supreme Court, the judges of the Court of Appeals, and the District Court judges. As we've all stated, and we all like to appreciate that judges do not represent anyone. They serve the constituency, and they are supposed to be. We would hope that our judges are nonpartisan and are operating according to the letter of the law, the state statute, and from a set jurisprudence. So why would we want to include our judges on a closed party primary?
Again, that's a decision that was made by multiple people to include them. If you'd like to bring an amendment to take them out, we can certainly vote on that. We have party affiliation for judges in this state. I know some of our colleagues wish we didn't. You may be one. That's something that can certainly be vetted by the state legislature in a bill.
They are registered as different party members, but most of them are not voted according to party lines. And some of those that we elect, since we do elect here, we hope that they would not be swayed by party affiliation, whereas you open up the tendency when they are being voted in on a closed primary for them to be more along party lines and not along the lines and letter of the law. So you kindly said it, so I would like to, if I can't get an amendment, to remove the judges, if you're okay with that.
I mean, I'm certainly up to the will of the committee and the vote. You certainly may offer any amendment you'd like. I just
would like to offer that one.
Yes, ma'am.
Just to take the judges out.
Okay.
I am asking, and then we'll make a motion to vote on it. But like I said, I would like this to be Congress on up, but a start is to take it off the judges. But more ahead of all of that, I would have liked to see this given more time and not rushed through this 8-day process that some of my colleagues want to have done in 5. This is not enough time because this is a very important discussion, but
So
this is not why we're here in this special session.
Yes, ma'am. If I can speak to that just for 1 second, I do understand that, we didn't have pre-filing. So yesterday, most of the bills dropped, and that I do understand that is certainly when most people saw the bills. Although there was a task force on this that met quite a lot and discussed this issue quite a bit.
I wasn't privy to their report. I apologize. And then I wasn't a part of their discussion.
But I also was not a part of the task force. But my point to that is that it's certainly not a brand new idea that hasn't been talked about in this legislature before, and then outside this legislature in a task force that was established by this or the previous legislature anyway. So it's certainly not a new concept. I do understand the quickness of this special session, but it is not a new concept that has not been discussed by a lot of people. Representative Boyer may have more information. I don't exactly remember who all was on that task force. I believe Secretary Landry was. but were you? I thought anyway. I'm sorry. Maybe Ms. Haskey was, but and I'm not trying to put them on the spot to answer any questions about the task force. But my point being that there was a task force about closed party primaries. I believe Congressman Scalise was also on it. There were a lot of different voices that discussed this process, and this is what we came up with. I believe that former Senator Hewitt brought a bill last year, maybe the year before as well, dealing with closed party primaries. So certainly not a brand new concept that has not been discussed before, but I do understand the nature of this bill and what we're discussing here.
Yes, and again, I have no comfort in the people who were named that were on that task force, and I have also concerns again by it being presented now, because the task force and the other times you discussed this issue being discussed was during the regular session, when we had more time to digest the information that was being given to us. We definitely were not in the middle of a weather warning where we would have more people to come in and give us more information about this. So it is the fact that it's being done during this short special session that gives me concern. I never say that it was a new concept. It's just something that's coming up now, where we just don't have a lot of time to discuss. But I do appreciate you putting your name on here and wanting to bring this up. And there's two fine ladies that you have next to you who are always willing and available to answer our questions outside of session, on weekends, on Sunday and Saturday mornings, and answering our questions. So thank you all. I'm finished.
Thank you, Rep. Newell.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Newell. Representative Gadberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Point of clarification, the cost of the election has been tossed around 11 million, 8 million, 13 million. Is that per election? In other words, 8 million for the primary, 8 million for the general, 8 million for the
It's
runoff, or
approximately
is that-
7.2 million in direct costs per election, per statewide election, and 3 million in indirect costs per statewide election.
So it's for the primary, is that much, for the general
Correct.
is that much, and for
Correct.
any runoff it's that much, roughly?
Correct, and for the constitutional amendment. it's
Okay,
that
thank
much.
you.
So-
Ms. Secretary, also just to add on that, the spring election going forward, I know this year is a little bit going to be a little bit more abnormal, but if we combine that primary election with the current spring election, we should kind of have I'm not calling it not a savings, but based on our discussions of savings, but it should be similar cost to what it is now with our spring elections, correct?
But those are not statewide. Not every parish has a spring election.
Okay, so there might be some incremental costs based on the additional parishes.
It would expand it to a statewide election, correct, Sharon?
That is correct.
So-
Okay, thank you. Representative Larverdane?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Rep.
But it would save costs better than having a whole nother election. It would be cheaper than that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Representative Larverdane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Rep. Emerson, and it's good to see Rep. Landry. We go back some years. Former Rep. Landry. Ms. Emerson, in regards to, we've got some confusion on who can vote and who cannot vote. We don't want to be in a situation where we disenfranchise and prohibit folks that want to vote but can't vote. Kind of clarify the confusion we're dealing with, because that's my concern.
Sure.
As a legislator, we want to encourage people to get involved in the process. We want people to vote. So clarify the confusion that we're dealing with. So if you can't vote in this primary, if you're not a Republican and a Democrat, clarify that confusion, because I'm concerned about that.
We'll be happy to. So, in a closed party primary, it is closed to nominate the candidate of that party's choosing.
So a Republican will have to nominate and vote if you're a Republican. Is that correct? Or a Democrat vote if you're a Democrat. Is that correct?
Yes. So those registered in those individual parties will be able to go and vote in the party primary. Each individual party has a choice of whether or not they would like for unaffiliated voters, so those not registered in a party, to vote in their party primary. That is a choice that will be made, I believe, by the state central committees of the parties. So they'll have that choice to allow unaffiliated voters not registered in a party. And I believe we settled on they would have to notify the Secretary of State's office about 90 days before qualifying. Yeah. So to have the proper time to allow for that to happen. So that's what would happen in the party primaries, where we are coming up with the party nominees for those individual parties. In a general election, everyone may vote. That is how it works in this country. I mean, everyone votes in the general election. We are just talking about the party primaries coming up with a nominee for the individual parties.
And to make sure I'm correct. So if in the general election, everybody votes,
Of course.
Republican, Democrat, Independent, and so forth.
Of
But in
course.
the party primary, you have to be either Republican or Democrat, or you have to go through the process, and that party has to allow you to be able to vote.
It is up to the individual parties and their committees to decide whether or not they would like unaffiliated voters not registered in a party to be allowed to vote in their party's primary.
So the Republican committee will set a criteria on how we're going to allow these folks to vote, and the Democratic Central Committee will do the same.
In their individual party primaries, yep.
And so our objective is to try to get as many people to the polls to cast their ballot. Is that our intent? Is that what their
Our intent overall in general, I
Yes.
love it when people go vote in in a general election. Yes, I mean that's obviously we want people to go vote.
Let me tell you what
This is about electing a nominee for individual parties, and I think most people, and again, I realize we have multiple polls out there, but most independents also feel that other people should not be able to interject their voices in individual party primary process to come up with that party's nominee.
Let me tell you what I got a problem with.
Okay.
And it's similar to Rep. Newell's bill, comments. I'm concerned about when you change the process of voting so quickly, and we hadn't had the bill 24 hours. I'm concerned about everybody understanding the bill and understanding the intent so we can get people to the polls. I would hate to have a bill where people are thinking, I can vote, but I didn't go. I'm independent. I want to vote, but I didn't understand the 90-day process, so I cannot vote. Or the Central Committee did not set parameters so I can vote. So I'm worried about that. So I want to make sure that when we move on something that we have the time and that everybody has the input to say, hey, it's good, it's bad, I like it. But this is also my concern. When you deal with the party primary, I'm concerned with the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, and all the judges. If we don't have a parameter in place, if we have an independent who wants to run for judge, then can they run and participate if,
Of course,
okay,
in the general election.
in a general election, but not in the party primary?
Well, because they're not affiliating with a party, and it is a party primary.
Okay. And we have about 600,000 no party people in the in the state,
That's
and we got about 4.6 million people in the state. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Larvadane. Representative Emerson, I'm having a little bit of difficulty, because we talked about this earlier in the meeting, with I guess the disenfranchisement of voters concept. We have, I would imagine turnout in a presidential election cycle, and even in the attention on that presidential election cycle is pretty noted everywhere. And we have presidential primaries where people come out and vote. And we still have these folks who are registered as independent and registered as no party even though we've been having these presidential primaries ongoing, so if they have gone to the polls to vote in these primaries and have been not allowed to vote in those primaries because they wanted to support President Biden or they wanted to support President Trump, wouldn't there be a rush of these folks to go and register? Because neither party allows for the no party folks to vote. Wouldn't there be a rush of people going and changing their party to either Democrat or Republican so they could vote in their primaries? Or is it that they say, hey, we still want to maintain independence and we're going to vote in the ultimate general election? Maybe can you expand on that a little bit? Because this is kind of troubling me.
So it's my understanding from just comments I've heard over the years from the Secretary of State's office is certainly every 4 years you do have plenty of people who realize that they are not registered in a party when they go vote for president. I think in this situation, the more you have these party primaries, like the presidential preference primary, you will have more opportunities for people to realize that they may or may not be registered in a party. I think they probably do have people who realize that every 4 years. It's my understanding that they do. So this will probably provide more opportunities for them to realize that.
And maybe for the Secretary of State, can you just tell us real quick how easy it is? I know we're going to have a window where you're going to have to close the books, maybe 30 days, 45 days or whatnot. But how easy is it for somebody to change parties if they want to vote in the primary, in the party primary?
They can change it online
Okay.
or in person.
On an app or
On the app.
the Go
on the
Vote app?
or on our website, right?
Okay. All right. Thank you. Representative Farnham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's get off of that train and we'll get on a different train. So the 1,000 signatures that are required for somebody that's not affiliated with a party, that doesn't qualify as one of the major parties. And we've taken in a lot of different voting population districts into this, like our district's 45,000 or so, statewide it's much greater. Does the 1,000 change as you go across the board, or is it just 1,000, period?
It's just 1,000.
Okay.
Is that correct?
We're going to get some clarification here.
I do.
For Congress.
Yeah, for Congress.
For Congress, it's 1,000.
So like,
We're going to add Ms. Lowry, and maybe we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, members, the present law provides different number of signatures for nominating petitions depending on the size of the district. So for Congress, it is 1,000. For a member of Bessie, it would also be 1,000. A judge of a court of appeal, 500. An officer elected throughout a judicial district, such as the district judges, 500. The Senate, 500 from within the district. House of Representatives, 400 from within the district.
perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you for
very
that
much.
clarification, Ms. Lowry.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Representative Wright. I'm trying to add you. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair, thanks for the bill.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, thanks for coming. I just hear a lot of things that confuse or frustrate me, and I just want to take a few minutes to point them out. Just for the record, I filed a bill, and I should be a co-author on this one. I will be, assuming we get past this point. But I find it interesting, some of the things that are being stated. Let's just start with the stats, for example. I'm looking at the NCSL chart for state primary election systems, okay? There are at least 21 states that have closed or partially closed elections. Almost all of them.
How many did you say?
I have 21. Hold on, I'm going to. The numbers will add up in a moment.
Okay.
So if you look at the NCSL chart, it's got 3 different types. It's got closed, partially closed,
Their
partially.
charts were a little different in my opinion, but yeah.
So point just is though that all of the states that fit into that category are states that I think we should. We got a fair argument to emulate them, right? We always got to be unique, but I mean when we look at those states, like, you know what, we could be a whole lot better off on it. But if you look at the whole chart, there's only 5 that have an open system like us, and we're one of the 5. So that means 45 states have some sort of party primary, okay, in a variety of ways, all right? I'm reminded, my former seatmate ran for governor, ran around, and I think his opening line or part of his shtick was like, if you cross the border between Louisiana and Texas, you automatically, have a higher median income, you live 10 years longer, this kind of stuff. And it's a funny comment, like a lot of things he says, but it's just true. It's sad, but we have this like terminal uniqueness, right? We want to do everything our own way, but yet what does it do? It leads us to being 49th and 50th in a lot of things. Let's try some things other states are doing that are basic. I really applaud the governor for putting this in here. I know it's not easy, but look, to do this bill this term, but like we're getting the politics out the way initially, right? We did it for 2 years back in 2008 through 2010, and then we just rug pulled it, kind of like Lucy and Charlie Brown. Like it's just kind of crazy to me that we would do that. Why wouldn't we give it a try to see how it works, just like other states are doing? So I really appreciate the work being done here. The other couple of things I want to point out, nobody's being disenfranchised. If you don't want to be a Republican, you don't get to vote in there. If you don't want to be a Democrat, you don't have to vote in there. People get to vote. You just don't get to choose the way people want to choose, at least according to some of our representatives, right? If you want to be a Republican, become one. Parties are important. They organize our thoughts, our debates, and our decision-making, right? And when you muddy up the waters like we have here, you don't know what you're talking about. And final thing I'll say is, like, we talk about the judges, and this is my rant, but maybe one day I'll do the bill. But I just think judicial elections are one of the more ridiculous elections in the state. I get more comments from friends asking me who to vote for in judge elections. And think about it. They can't talk about a subject. They can't talk about, they can't even take money, right? I mean, it's like a student council election. But yet we've got all the, and you're right, they don't represent us, they serve us, right? There's something wrong with that. And I think we've seen it. I mean, we saw a Supreme Court election not a few years ago where somebody had to recuse themselves because they took too much money to run for Supreme Court judge. What kind of system is that? So let's be bold in Louisiana. Let's take some steps and do what some of these other states are doing. We can make this work, right? We had a task force about this 2 or 3 years ago. I was drafting a bill with Senator Hewitt over this and just deferred to her to work on it because she's a good friend and I appreciated what she was doing. But I think this is an important first step to kind of set our house in order and start addressing the things beyond which are important. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wright. Remarkably, that clears the board. So we're going to go ahead and take up some of the folks that are here with us today that would like to speak. We're going to start with our white cards. We're going to call. Excuse me. Representative Thomas for a question.
Yes. Is it appropriate to invoke the 3-minute rule?
We can do that. Is there any objection to the committee adopting the 3-minute rule? Seeing none, the rule is adopted.
Thank you.
All right. Dr. Stephen Procopio with PAR. Thank you. Please identify yourself for the committee.
I'd like to thank Representative Thomas for giving me the 3-minute rule right before I get here. I appreciate that. Dr. Stephen Procopio, I'm the president of the Public Affairs Research Council. We were founded in 1950, so we're almost a 75-year-old organization. We work on a lot of areas. For this committee, we work in things like ethics, campaign finance reform, open meetings, public records. For example, I worked with Thomas on constitutional reform. I worked with Representative Newell on trying to change some of the public meetings, especially after COVID. So I hope to work with y'all on a lot of different things, education, definitely spend a lot of time in the money committees. I also want to thank all of y'all for being here as well. This is a tough time, and this is the first of many sessions that you're all going to have to go through. So I do appreciate that. Specifically, we wrote a commentary, and it wasn't specific to this bill. So I need to be clear about that. The details may differ. But to go into the confusion, so I went and looked at the actual testimony that happened in 2010 when they revoked the the congressional elections, and basically it was clear, as everyone knew, it was costing a lot of money and causing confusion. And it was an overwhelming vote in both the Houses, 76-16, and unanimous in the Senate to get rid of it. They really had one election in 2008, and in 2010, before the election, they said, no, this is not working, and everyone agreed. It's just, what could they do better? And that's when they reverted back. So I think overwhelmingly, and that was just congressional elections. That's not looking at what this bill is doing at a much higher level. I don't think there's any doubt there's going to be a lot of confusion. If you just look at this room, I think that's definitely going to happen. In terms of disenfranchisement, I have to disagree with the idea that you're not disenfranchised if you get to vote in the general election. And it's a little bit of a history lesson. So there were actually, party primaries were in fact a good thing when you moved away from party bosses when people couldn't vote. But there was also a history of racial primaries. Basically, you couldn't vote. You had a black primary and a white primary. And the idea was that the white people would already make decisions. And that was, basically, there was one in the case that was actually here in Louisiana. There was U.S. versus Classic that got rid of that because people disenfranchised. And you can't disenfranchise on the basis of race. You can disenfranchise, and that also works in redistricting, on the basis of party. So it is in fact legal, but you are in fact stopping people from voting. And the cost, again, whatever the cost is, I don't believe this is really the issue that's going to fix Louisiana. There's lots of things, that our tax system, our educational system. No one, as far as I'm aware, and I apologize if I'm wrong, none of y'all ran on a system of like, hey, it's going to fix Louisiana? Party primaries. And let me be clear, party primaries are in fact the majority of the systems. There's only just a handful. But open systems are the majority. There are 35 systems that have an open primary system as opposed to only 15 that have the closed primary system that you're having. So you're actually going to move to a system that is used by fewer states for these elections. And that's been the sort of the long course going from party bosses, party primaries, and most states have been moving away from that, and we're going to move backwards. With that, happy to answer any questions if y'all have any.
Can you go, I have a question for you. Can you, on this last comment,
Sure.
on the open primaries versus closed primaries in the different states, can you take a couple of seconds to just expand on that a little bit and dig into that a
Sure,
little
and this
bit
is based
deeper?
on the same thing that Representative Wright was looking at in terms of what the different primary systems are. And there are different ways to classify this. This is not the end-all, be-all definitions, but you have closed, partially open, open to unaffiliated voters, open, and then you have the sort of top two, top four, which is only that's like Louisiana. We're a top two.
So they still have the primary system, it's just more of an open primary system.
Yes, so they have a primary. So, for example, then voters can make their determination of whether or not they want to vote, as opposed to what we're proposing, which is a partially closed, which is up to the parties and what the party bosses decide how voters can vote. So that would be the big difference. There's only 15 of those, either closed or partially closed, and 35 of open races, whether they are political or not, or partisan or not, is really the big difference between us and, say, Texas. I will let you know, Texas has an open system. So we talk about crossing the border. They have an open primary system. They are not a closed primary system.
But if and again, going back to the disenfranchising comment, if someone wants to vote in the party primary and
then they are not disenfranchised from the, well, then they can. If they're not one of the members of that system, then they are disenfranchised from the party primary.
But if they wanted to join that, if they elect to join that party, they're able to vote in it, correct?
Yeah, but that doesn't change the fact that they are disenfranchised if they want to vote. You have to require some action, then they can move. In that case, it is better than racial disenfranchisement because people have a choice. And this is, look, I'm not saying this is illegal. I'm just saying this is a step backwards in what we're doing. And, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a move that people are not going to quite understand. There's going to be a lot of explanation in terms of how this system works. There was a lot of confusion just for the congressional ones. But yeah, in terms of, I think we're on the same page. As I understand the bill, if you decide to join a party, then you will be allowed to vote in that party's election. But if you do not decide to, and we have roughly 30% of the state are not right now, they would not be able to vote in a party system. They have to wait and see what comes to the
If the
general.
parties elect not to allow
That's right.
the no party
determination
voters,
of the
because that percentage is that large percentage is mostly those who are no party. So if either party wants to allow those folks, they can do that.
Right. It would be up to the parties and not, for example, up to y'all. This is a decision made by unelected party leaders.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Procopio, that clears the board. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you all very much.
I'm going to ask Mr. John Couvion with JMC Analytics to come to the table. Mr. Couvion, you're very familiar to this committee, but would you please introduce yourself?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of this committee, John Couvion, James Analytics and Polling. I will try to be as brief as possible regarding my poll findings. There was reference to the quote-unquote mini polls being released about this topic of open versus closed primaries. More specifically, I know of two, and I'm one of those two. I do want to talk about, there's really two halves to the equation of the poll that was conducted. The first would be the financial aspects of the poll, which was previously addressed in the Appropriations Committee meeting. The what I call substantive parts of the poll, which is basically getting into the policy types of questions about attitudes about the closed primary versus the open primary. Those are what I will address briefly in today's committee hearing. More specifically, this was a poll of likely voters in Louisiana, and we sought several things. It was mainly to seek information about, number one, what people think about the current system, number two, what people think about the proposed system, and number three, would you be more or less likely to vote for an elected official who favors a change to the closed primary? With regards to the question about the current system, which has been in place since the 1970s, with the brief exception of the 2008 and 2010 elections for congressional, that system is favored 65 to 20%, and the poll language clearly and unequivocally mentioned that it was the current open primary system. That 65 to 20 spread, by the way, is substantially similar regardless of whether we're talking about race, about party, about gender, about the geographic area of our state. Number two, the proposed going to the closed primary is opposed by voters by a 56 to 26 margin. And again, the responses are fairly similar regardless of race, party, geographic area, and so forth. The third question was, if you believe that someone should be elected with 50% of the vote or not. On that question, the numbers were quite one-sided, 84 to 7% in favor. Finally, the question is, would you be more or less likely to support an elected official who supports changing from an open to a closed primary? That was the specific wording. 54 to 20% affirmatively say they would be less likely to support an elected official. The important thing about what this poll said, the substantive part which I'm discussing in this committee, is number one, there's little difference with regards to what the races and the parties and the geographic areas think. In other words, there's a broad consensus of support for the current system. Number two, there's little appetite for changing from that current system to another system. And finally, one of the things I think that's important to appreciate with regards to the talk about the open versus closed primaries, there's really two dimensions to the open versus closed primary system. Y'all have been talking about semi-closed, closed, open, and so forth, but there's another layer that I believe needs to be discussed, and that is, I count 30 states that have party registration, and in the Deep South, only 3 do, Louisiana, North Carolina, and Florida. So what we're talking about usually is a system where people go into the polls and decide if they want to be a Democrat or Republican with regards to primary participation. And if you're in a Deep South state, then you have the runoff to participate in, although you're typically bound by the party ballot you chose in the primary. But I think a mention of how widespread the system of party registration is an important additional piece of contextual data that needs to be communicated here, because not every state is like Louisiana where we have party registration. Our neighbors, in fact, Arkansas, Texas, and Mississippi, they do not have party registration. But getting back to the main point.
Now, Mr. Couvion, remember,
Yes,
we have the 3-minute rule. Your 3 minutes
I'll wrap.
is up.
Yes.
But I do have a question for you. Are other states rushing to a jungle primary? And I know, look, change is not easy. I don't think anybody in this room would agree that change is easy. And when you listening to your polling questions, it's asking about that change, and most people like the status quo simply in most things, not politics out of it. So change is sometimes difficult. If the jungle primary was the best system, why isn't everybody rushing to the jungle primary?
What's interesting about your question, Mr. Chairman, is that there's variations of that are going on in other states. You do have California and Washington, which have systems similar to ours. The big difference in California and Washington is that you could get 50% of the vote in primary and still have to face the same opponent again in November. Eric Swalwell, who's a congressman from the Bay Area in California, he faced an incumbent, and it was just the two of them running. They had to face each other twice. So imagine the challenge of having to face the same person, knowing you already beat that person in June, having to face that person again in November. The variation I'm referring to, not trying to take this committee's time, the variation I'm talking about is other states are looking into a ranked choice voting / instant runoff voting system. Now, the one thing that's important to understand about that, it's a big debate topic, but you have to realize a lot of these states that are considering it, they do not have runoffs. So you could have somebody theoretically getting elected with 10% of the vote. So my thought about the
We don't want to
runoff-
go down the ranked choice. We don't want to take members down the ranked choice road. That's a whole nother debate,
Correct.
and we can be here all day on that. So
And my
let's try
understanding
and-
is that's being debated in SGA this morning.
Okay, well, let's kind of stick in the
Yeah.
lanes of
But
this.
that is it's not exactly open primaries per se, but it is a variation of that in that you are allowing voters another shot at making a choice to where a candidate does need to get elected with 50% of the vote.
Okay. Representative Wright for a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Cuvion, for coming. Appreciate your work. I think what I'd like to know is, who did you do the poll for? Who is this group that you did it for?
Yes, the group is Republic Renewal, is a national PAC.
Okay, so it's a national PAC that wants to talk about how we do our elections, right?
They're a national PAC that sought opinions about open versus closed primaries. So the question making was a collaborative process.
Do you know how they're funded?
Sorry?
Do you know how they're funded?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that clears the board, Mr. Cuvion. Thank you for being here with us. We always appreciate your testimony. We're going to move on to our green cards. We have Mr. Charlie Buckles, who is here and would like to speak. Mr. Buckles, would you please make your way to the chair? Please introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you. I'm Charlie Buckles, Lafayette, Louisiana, Deputy Chairman of the State Republican Party. Thank you for the opportunity. This is an issue that I've dealt with for many years, very much in favor of closed primaries. And I'm going to try to be, I've taken so many notes now, this is going to be an issue. But Representative Lyons, I think he left, but he really got my attention when he said, what are the advantages? Let's talk about that for a second. What are the real advantages? The real advantages of a closed primary system is that we're really going to start talking about philosophy of governing. We're going to be talking about it at the grassroots level. So when people run for office, some people may realize that a lot of times when people run for office, the campaign slogan is, well, my opponent is a rat. I want us to get away from that. I want us to get back to the different philosophies of the Republican, Democrat, and other parties so that when voters go to the polls, that's what you're making the decision on, is that philosophy of governing. The closed primary allows that. It's a true grassroots type of campaign and philosophy. It's also less costly when you run for office the first time because you're running in your own, speaking to your own party voters at that particular point. A lot of the big money consultants, campaign people don't like this simply because there is less money involved in the initial closed primary. Again, it's based on the philosophy of governing. Voters will more likely understand the issues because you're running on why I am a Republican or Democrat or whatever other major party. Now, a couple of things I'd like to bring up here. We talked about the individual parties can decide whether the unaffiliated will vote in their primary. It was stated here that unelected party leaders will decide that. Well, both parties are our representatives are elected at a very grassroots level. There are no, quote, unelected party bosses. From the Democrat side, there's a male and a female in every state central committee district. In Republican, each Republican state central committee member represents about 4,000 Republicans. So it is truly a grassroots decision from that standpoint. We talk about the different elections, why it didn't work back in 08, 09, well, one of the biggest reasons, and I was involved in it very much at the time, is that when it was designed, it was not designed the way it was intended. We had 3 elections within 80 days. Think about that. 3 elections within 80 days. That's the primary reason it failed. A lot of other things I could talk about. I know my time's up. But if we move to a closed primary system, I believe that more people will get involved at the grassroots level because it's going to be driven by both parties. And the last thing I'll say is that for the first time, a very small party can get a nominee on the general election ballot. Before now, you had no chance of that. Now, all you got to go is get maybe 400 or 500 signatures, and whatever party you can get on that general election ballot, not available under our current system.
Thank you, Mr. Buckles. Can you maybe explain, and I know you're here representing the Republican Party, would there be any differences for the Republican Party that would be different for the Democrat Party in this process, or is it's an equal?
Absolutely not. It's equal across the board, and it's the equal in other closed primary states. You know, we've talked about we would be the only state that's disenfranchising voters. Pennsylvania has 1 million no-party voters. They can't vote in either primary in Pennsylvania. I could go on and on about.
And there's no rush to go register for a party to
No.
where they feel disenfranchised?
Texas, right, and in Texas was brought up. Texas, there's actually a movement in Texas now to close their party primaries. So there is that. Whether it's going to happen or not, we don't know. So more of them are moving to that direction.
Yeah, another question on the unelected members and the leaders of the party. You talked about the state central committee, but you also talked about grassroots. Are there other elected members of the party on a more grassroots level than the state central committee?
Absolutely. Parish executive committees. I think it's going to empower both the Republican and Democrat and also other fledgling parties that would want to establish. They now have a path with which to convey their message of governing. This is the right thing.
Yeah, how are parish executive committee members on party parish executive committee members elected?
Each parish will elect a parish executive member according to the number of either police jury, council members. There'll be 1 representing each district, and typically roughly 5 at large in each parish. So again, it is the most basic of grassroots.
So when they say elections are local, these parish executive committees and whatnot are probably about as local as you can get?
And this gets it as local as it gets, exactly.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Buckles. Mr. Buckles, there are no other questions for you. We appreciate your testimony. We have also, thank you. We have a green card also from the Pelican Institute. I believe Mr. Daniel Ersbaumer is not with us, but there's another representative. If Miss Erin Bindley, if you'd please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm not Daniel. Daniel sends his regards. Unfortunately, he was not able to be here due to the road conditions, but he's given me a testimony that he had prepared to deliver, so that's what I'll read today. Members of the House and Government Affairs Committee, thank you for the opportunity to share my views on the question of closed party primaries in Louisiana. I'm so sorry I can't be there with you today in person. In 2020, I had the opportunity to serve on the closed party primary task force, the one that was mentioned before. During those task force meetings, we heard testimony from a variety of voices from across the political spectrum, and the debate and discussion was robust and productive. Ultimately, I supported the proposal to move to a party primary system and continue to do so today. The laws governing state party primaries are complex and nuanced, to say the least, and the state primary laws have been the cause of confusion among voters and election administrators alike. Ballotpedia, the nonpartisan digital encyclopedia of American politics, identifies the variety of ways that states organize their primary elections. In 20 states, at least one political party conducts open primaries for congressional and state level offices. In 15 states and D.C., at least one political party conducts closed primaries. In 14 states, at least one political party conducts semi-closed primaries where non-affiliated voters can choose to participate in the partisan primary of their choice on Election Day or sometime just before. 4 states defer the administration of political primaries to the parties themselves. And 5 states use some version of a top 2 or top 4, in the case of Alaska, primary. Nebraska has a unicameral legislature and does not list party affiliation of legislative candidates on the ballot. Louisiana is the only state where, on the general election date, all candidates run on the same ticket. If no candidate receives over 50% of the vote, then the top 2 vote getters face a runoff 6 weeks later. One way to look at this is to say that there is no primary election, just a general election for all candidates with a runoff when needed. As I listened to the debate during task force meetings, 2 compelling arguments against a party primary system emerged. One claims that closed primaries disenfranchise non-affiliated voters. The other is that closed primaries would lead more candidates at the fringes of their parties, shouldering out moderates and rewarding extremism. The data tell a different story, however. To the question of disenfranchising of independent voters, a 2012 study conducted by scholars at the University of Arizona found that voters actually react strategically to changes in a state's primary laws. Further, to the second point, this study found that closing primaries tended to produce a moderating effect on party structures as individuals who may have less partisan attachment in an open system migrate to one party or the other, bringing more moderates into the fold. Almost finished, Mr. Chairman. Further, the data...
Let's keep it tight. We limited everybody, so if you got a point, let's make it quick.
Okay. Further, the data suggests that non-affiliated voters tend to vote less frequently than those attached to a party affiliation. No doubt, Louisiana has a relatively high number of non-affiliated voters. The body of research which suggests that this has as much to do with our current primary structure as anything else, and registration patterns have shifted significantly here over the last several decades, even with that system. And if the last statewide election is any indication, this has not produced a particularly high turnout in our state elections. The research suggests that closing primaries could actually have some impact in reversing that trend, though certainly it's not definitively predictive of that. Thank you for your focus on this issue today and the opportunity to share my perspective. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
Thank you, Ms. Bentley. We appreciate the work that Pelican does and your insight.
Thank you.
There are no questions for you, so the board is clear. We're going to move on to our red cards. We'll start with our former colleague, Mr. Barry Ivy. Would you approach the stage? Welcome to House and Governmental, Mr. Ivy.
Thank you, thank you.
Want to introduce yourself for the committee, even
Yes,
though
I
you're
am
pretty familiar?
Mr. Barry Ivy, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm very familiar with this committee, having served 2 terms on this committee. I understand the challenges and issues that y'all have to deal with, and these are no small decisions. So I appreciate your time and attention. Oh, I'm on. Wait, okay, I got it. All right. So it is not my intentions to be offensive in what I say, but in the sake of brevity, I may not be able to provide all the contextual clarification and prefacing of statements. So my apologies for that. So we were told by Governor Landry that it was going to be different this term. Finally, Republicans rule, so it's going to be different, and that we would be placing people over politics. But in his first acts as governor, he is pushing a bill that exactly places politics over people. That's what this bill does. This bill is about political interest. It is not about the people's interest. Statistics, the LAGOP, they came up here, testified. I was on the Serve on State Central Committee for 12 years. not running again. So I'm very aware of state party politics, having, again, been involved for quite a while. So we've heard the data, Democrats, there's 38.48% registered Democrats as of yesterday's numbers, 33.91% registered Republicans, and 27.61% other. My interpretation is this, 66.09% of the registered voters in the state don't want to have an R by their name. They've had plenty of opportunity. Now, this state elects Rs, as is evidenced by this last fall's election. So it's not about Rs getting into office. They get there. But how come with such, strong support by the electorate for Rs, how come only 33.91% want to have an R by their name? People can switch. So in some of the comments is made, basically it's like join the party or don't participate. But that's not disenfranchising voters in the process. Look, there was only 36.3% turnout in the primary. And then the election that we're going to allow everybody to participate in, if we had this election, this process set up for this past fall, there's a whopping turnout of 23.1% for the statewide offices in the runoff. Who are we kidding? This is not about serving the people's best interest. Besides the issues with the plurality and what the implications mean there. So it was said, Mr. Buckles had stated, they said, if I'm quoting correctly, we wouldn't be the only state disenfranchising voters, and he gave Pennsylvania as an example. And so again, we had the October and November primary, runoffs. And I think people are disillusioned with state politics. They're disillusioned with the politics because too often it's more about political interest, political pressures, and everything else. And the reality is that you can't serve political interests and the people at the same time. And in our state's history, that it's more of what our legacy is. So anyway, in closing, I appreciate one last closing statement is this. If you don't fully understand this bill, who it impacts, how it works, or who it serves, vote no. The only mandate that this be done in this compressed special session is from the governor. This bill can be taken up during the general session and provide more opportunity for the public to weigh in. Thank you.
Representative Ivey, I have a question for you just on your last comment. And you just mentioned can't serve the political interest and the people at the same time. I mean, from a literal standpoint, they have sent us here to represent their political interests. So how are you not serving the people at the same time? This is a political building. This is a political body. You're not going to take politics out of it. Your politics is local. There's no question about it. But how can you say you can't serve the political interests, your values, and your people at the same time when that's when they elected to do it? I want to give you the opportunity to explain yourself is what I'm asking.
And respectfully, my perspective may be more novel. So the role that each of you serve in is as a lawmaker. That's the job. The job is policy. That is at the bedrock what this job is. Policy is the only thing that can shape the future of this state. That's what actually moves the needle. Politics has never solved a single problem. Politics is a bunch of factions. It's a bunch of people who are more concerned more often. If you read the history of our country, our founding fathers, George White and other people's perspective on political factions, what you find is it's more about power and control, and it's more specialized interests than the interests of the people. And so that's my perspective again, on what the job is. It's not about politics. It's policy.
And I get the policy making part of it, but if you're an R or if you're a D, typically you're supporting certain policies, and the people that you represent, that's why they send you here. Not because you have the R or the D, but it's a general assertion that saying, hey, this is a group of policies that the Democrats support. This is a group of policies that the Republicans support. And so they go along with each other, and it's a political party for a reason. It's politics. And I agree with you that we are policymakers. There's no question about it. But to have the narrative that you're going to take politics out of political offices and the policymakers, I just don't know if that narrative is so literal, and I get it. The statesman in you is voicing this concern, but I think we can all still. I think you represented your people when you were in office through your politics and your policy making, and your constituents sent you here for that reason. I think each of us has done the same thing, and if any of our folks, if we are representing something other than what we portray in our political interests and start to adopt policies that don't align with those political interests, we're going to be voted out. So I see a little bit more gray there than just being absolute, as you mentioned, and so.
And I recognize that, and I will say there's a big difference between, there's been some direct correlations being made between federal and state government. They're two different universes. They're nothing alike, and so to the extent, and again, in my experience with the state party, the entirety of the focus of the party, if in the few instances that policy may even have been discussed, was at the federal level and certainly never at the state level. And so I think this illusion, it's so abstract, and most people don't realize that the state party meets three to four times a year. Usually the fourth meeting gets canceled. Meets 3 times a year, and ultimately all power, at least with the LAGOP, resides with the executive committee. That's where all the day-to-day decisions are made. There's no discussions on policy that affects the direction and future of this state, and there's no engagement. There's been no, nothing outlined by the LAGOP as far as the policies in my last 12 years. I don't know if you've received anything from the state level. Obviously, at the delegation level, we discuss policy, every day. But anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to make clarification.
Representative Newell for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say hello to my former colleague and my former committee member, Representative Ivy. It's good and refreshing to have you back.
It's Mr. Ivy now.
You will always be Representative Ivy to me. But I appreciate you coming back and participating in this process as Citizen Ivy and being the voice of reason and showing us pointing out things that we normally don't see. And I do like your explanation and the differentiation between policy making and politics, because politics does often negatively impact the policies that we are here to make, to put this state on the right track. But I just wanted to say hello.
Thank you.
And welcome back.
Appreciate it. I won't be a stranger, so sorry.
Don't. Please don't.
You had some people
I wonder if I was
guessing.
the inspiration for the 3-minute rule request. See me in the crowd. Okay. Not you, Ms. Thomas. Representative Thomas.
Thank you, former Representative Ivy. Thank you, Ms. Newell. That clears the board. What's that? Did I say miss? I'm sorry. Representative Newell. I expect no difference. We're going to call on Mr. William Bryan with the Independent Party in Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Please introduce yourself for the committee.
This afternoon now. Yes, I'm William Bryan. I am the Executive Director of the the Independent Party of Louisiana. And I had the party officially recognized by the Secretary of State in 2016, and we are now one of the 5 political parties in the state. So real quick, I just want to mention that according to the Secretary of State, there are almost 800,000 unaffiliated voters who are not Democrat or Republican. So that would mean you have 800,000 Louisianians who cannot vote in primary elections. And it was mentioned earlier that you can vote in a general election, but the Independent Party wants to argue that a lot of these general elections are not meaningful. And our issue is trying to be able to vote in meaningful elections. Because you go to a lot of parts of the state where the final elections are the party primaries. Because a lot of times when they're partisan bastions, you get the primary elections are basically concluded in the for mayor, DA, city council, and the Republicans and the independents can vote in the general election, but they really don't mean anything because basically the party primaries have concluded the election, so the general election is just a meaningless election. So, and also we believe that returning to closed party primaries can likely deepen partisan divide in Louisiana because it would tend to push candidates farther to the right and Democrats further to the left. And so it would discourage middle-of-the-road voters from voting in general elections where they have to pick between partisan extremes. And then also we mentioned earlier about the cost. This is if we go back to closed party primaries, this is the first time in 50 years, basically, we've had closed party primaries. So as the Secretary of State mentioned earlier, it's going to add to the electoral process. And so you go talk to Louisianians around the state and say, would you rather spend $13 million on more elections, or do you want to improve infrastructure, fight crime, enhance education? It's not really the necessary expenditure of money that we think that we should have. And, basically someone had mentioned earlier about going back to primary elections, the jungle primary that we have now. Is that really serving the public interest? And when you look at it, we've had 13 general elections since we've gone to the primary, open primary. 6 were won by Republicans, 6 were won by Democrats, and 1 by a Democrat who became a Republican. So I don't see where that's causing us any harm. So I think that it would be an unnecessary expenditure to go to the closed party primaries, and it would cause more partisan divide in the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. We have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Bryan, if you maybe stay for a couple of minutes. Representative Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bryan, can you kind of elaborate on what you said earlier, or maybe provide some clarification? And you said that the general election is meaningless, and that the party primary is the meaningful election. I disagree. I think it's completely opposite. In the primary, that just allows me to go on to the next stage. But in the general is where we are actually electing that representative or mayor or council person. So I think all of the emphasis and the weight of an election is on the general, not on the primary.
Well, look at how we came to the jungle primary. Edwin Edwards decided he didn't want to run for a closed party primary and have to go through that, and then he didn't win outright, so he had to have a runoff for the party primary. And then what happened when he won? He faced he basically won the general election when he beat Dave Treen. So there are a lot of partisan areas of the state where you essentially win the ultimate election once you win the party primary because you don't have any opposition.
And that might be true in some parts of the state, but in others, obviously nothing is decided until the general election.
Well, of course, that's
would
the
it be
beauty.
true too, though, that for the independent party, and I think we heard from the Secretary of State's office that any party, Green, Libertarian, Independent, could hold their own party primaries if they met the threshold for certain ballot initiatives or candidates performing under that designation well enough in any election for a certain number of consecutive years. There's nothing that would prohibit the independent party or any other party from participating in these.
I mean, why would you, in an independent, run in New Orleans? I mean, when it's basically essentially all a Democrat, or any area that's essentially
so you're
one
saying
area
that
or
a party
the other.
that isn't valid in an area could not be on the general, hold a party primary or be in the general election. That's the nature of elections.
Sure, and it may be that it's something you can, like the independent party could work toward, but like we couldn't run this time. I mean, we just wouldn't have enough voters. So, I mean, it's a practical thing, but also it's a political thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks.
Mr. Bryan, no, you're popular today.
Oh.
Representative Newell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bryan, how are
Yes,
you?
ma'am.
Thank you for being here with us today.
Certainly.
You still with the AG's office?
No, ma'am.
How long did you run the elections division?
11 years,
So you have just a little bit of knowledge as to what we're talking about today.
I guess. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question with the independent party. Since it is a recognized party, however, doesn't meet all of the criteria in recognition as it relates to 1844-1C. Does the independent party have a state central committee or what's the other one we have? DCC?
Parish Executive.
Parish Executive Committee. Thank
No,
you.
ma'am.
Neither one of
We
them.
haven't established all that yet. We're putting it together. We just want to properly do it rather than just kind of throw it out there and replicate Democrat and Republican parties, and then we're working on
Whole
our
nother
own way.
mess, right? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to know that. And just the exchange that you just had with Representative Carlson, would you be able to just expound on that a little bit? Because that was also a concern of mine, where you do have parishes where you have more party represented than the other. But the people who might be, for example, my district, I represent Democrats and Republicans. And I get support from the Republicans who do live in the district and who I do represent. And I say I represent them because when the Republican constituents call, I take their calls just like I take the Dems. And when they invite me to their the party meetings, I attend because I am their representative. And I would not want what we're discussing today to take away their opportunity to vote for the candidate of choice who just might be me again. So how would that affect in other in parishes where you do have one party that kind of dominates over the other?
Well, I think a lot of what Representative Ivy mentioned about politics over people and things like that, because, I mean, there's a lot of times, there are some people that recognize that politics is a round process. I may not like your issue today, but I support you because you may like my issue tomorrow. And so, there's a lot of times when you get into these closed party primaries, you force people into more political issues because they want to win. So I need to be more Republican than whoever is running against me, or more Democrat than who's running against me. So that's what a lot of issue we have with the closed party primary is that it fails to recognize the totality of the issues in the district and forces you to focus on the politics of getting elected.
Right, as opposed to the things that actually matter, like
Correct.
Quality of life and education and health care and access to.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Like I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the cost, there were various costs thrown around. Well, yeah, that's great, but that's just for adding election issues to the electoral process. But then when you go around the state and you talk to people and you say, oh, well, we're going to close these primaries and it's going to cost us $10 million an election. Well, however many elections we have times 10 million, I could spend that on fixing roads and fighting crime and helping elderly and supporting veterans and things like that. So, sometimes this closed party primary has a tendency to focus people more on the politics rather than the issues that face the district on every day.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I appreciate you.
Thank you, Representative Newell. Representative Wright.
Thank you, sir. When did you start the independent party in Louisiana?
2018. I mean, 2016. I'm
So
sorry.
Are you chair or president of it?
Executive director.
Executive director. Is there a chair?
Yes.
Are there officers? How
Well,
were
we
they
just-
decided? How did those get picked?
Well, initially, we started the party to figure out how we could be an alternative to what we've been hearing from people talk about why I don't like the Democrat, why I don't like the Republican. So rather than just rush out and say, okay, we go to Secretary of State, follow 441B, and do everything we need to get recognized as a party, and then just, okay, we're going to have a state central committee, PECs, and do everything just like the Democrats and Republicans. So what we've been doing is basically just going around the state, listening to people and hear their ideas, their concerns, their frustrations, so that we can put all these together and come up with, productive bylaws and how to elect people. So we haven't really elected a slate of leaders yet.
Okay, so but point being is this: how many Republicans are involved in some of these decisions? Did you invite me as a Republican to make decisions within your party? My whole point is just that we're talking about you want the independents to be able to tell Republicans who their best candidate is, right? But you're not even part of that party. I didn't get invited to come help and make a decision for your party itself. Being an independent is a strategic decision. Go look at presidential election history, right? We've never seen an independent elected since Teddy Roosevelt. There's a reason. It's more effective to work within a party and then change it. Just look at President Trump. That's exactly what he did. He came in on a populist wave and changed that party, correct? He won. It was effective. It was a strategic decision. So that I think that what I'm hearing is that as a Republican who, has certain thoughts about how we should make decisions and do policy, and if people want to think that's about politics, fine. It's about philosophy. Go read Edmund Burke. Go read all the people who talked about party politics, deep history. Okay, you're asking us to let you come make a decision for us. No. You've got a chance in a runoff to make a decision on who's left. If you don't like that decision that's being made, if you think it's extreme, as you just mentioned, then come into the party and change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wright. Mr. Bryan, the board is clear. Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate you being here with us this afternoon. I'm going to ask Mr. Charles Jagano with St. Landry Parish. All right. I could silence the G and go.
Jagno.
Jagno. Okay, that's kind of where that was kind of headed. That's not silence,
yeah.
but
Thank you for your
welcome.
hospitality.
Please
Pardon?
introduce yourself for the committee.
Okay. My name's Charlie Jagno. I'm just won my 9th election to clerk of court in St. Landry Parish. I started when I was 18. And I'm in opposition to this bill because, to me, and I'm strictly speaking from my opinion, this bill will concentrate power in the parties themselves and not in the individual legislators or individual office holders. Policy will become dictated by either Republicans, Democrat folks in the hierarchy of either party. So I don't think it benefits either party to do this. Another thing I'd like to mention, Louisiana is ranked in the top 10 in as far as elections are concerned. So I want to just alleviate that little question. Sir? In the top 10 by the Heritage Foundation, yes.
From an ethical, from an honest, from integrity standpoint?
Right.
Okay,
correct.
thank you. Just wanted to clarify that for the committee so we make sure it's a good top 10 and not a bad top 10.
Okay, good. And as a chief elections officer of the parish, each clerk is responsible for the elections, and we'd like to think that we're also top 10 in all the other fields also. 70% of the people in Louisiana are middle of the road, and the majority of those middle of the road folks are conservatives. Let's face it. The 30% on either end, I usually call them wing nuts. People call them either, let's face it. So to me, I think the present system that we have where you wind up electing someone by a majority vote is much better than a plurality as proposed in this bill. Another thing, too, the commissioners commissioners are going to face a hard time when people go in who are not registered in either Republican or Democratic Party and have to be turned away from the polls. I think that's a portion of the disenfranchisement issue, and I think it affects everybody. I'd also like to comment the present system elected House Speaker Johnson, who I think is serving commendably at this point, keeping the country open. And that's about all I have to say. I think all of the polls and the percentages have been discussed by other speakers. So I'll open for questions.
The board is cleared out. We couldn't help but to think if we have a list of like 30 or 40 parties or political parties. There might be a wingnut party out there. It's the only thing I was kind of thinking. But Mr. Jagno,
unfortunately, they belong to both parties.
Mrs. Jagno, we appreciate you testifying here. The board is clear, but thank you for your testimony here today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to call Chairwoman Emerson back up and maybe the Secretary of State if y'all give us a second. We just found out there is no wingnut party, but there is a wild party. So just from a clarification
There's a pot
standpoint.
party. There's a grilled cheese party, a pickle party,
I see future legislation in these party affiliations.
a wingnut party.
So, Ms. Emerson, the floor is yours to close. If y'all have any, if you want to allow Secretary of State for any comments as well.
Sure.
So I'll give it to you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Again, Nancy Landry, Secretary of State. And I want to reiterate that we do not take a position on the policy. You guys are the policy makers, and we are neutral on whether we should have open or closed primaries. Our concern is logistical. Our concern is about maintaining the security and integrity of our elections. Like Mr. Jagno said, we are ranked in the top 10 in election integrity. And the reason we are is because we have a lot of security measures in place and a lot of safeguards in place when we conduct our elections that other states don't have. And what most people think about when they think of elections is the tip of the iceberg. And what we deal with is the bottom part of that iceberg, because there's a lot that goes on in the back end of elections that most people have no idea about. And I invite all of you to partake in our field trip that we offer to the HGA committee members to come to our agency and learn more about what we do and the security measures that we have in place, and take a deep dive into the elections process. But so our concerns on this bill are logistical. We're concerned about rushing this process and not having the right amount of time to make sure that we're getting everything right and we're not forgetting anything. And we also have concerns about some unexpected event throw in a wrench into it. I've been at the Secretary of State's office for 5 years, and we've never had we had 1 year last year when we didn't have an emergency during the fall elections. We've had hurricanes every year or a pandemic every year that I've been there. There's always something that comes up, and that could really impact, and this is a very important election year, being the presidential elections. And so we would prefer to have more time to implement this. We would prefer to start it in 2026, ideally. And so that's really our concern. It involves voter confusion. We would have more time to educate voters. We'd have more time to train our clerks, our registrars, our commissioners, and the voters, most importantly, the voters. And so we also have concerns about the ballot access issues. The Supreme Court has said that ballot access cannot be overly burdensome. And if there's litigation about that, we don't know if this is overly burdensome or not, but if there's litigation involving that issue, there could be a stay of the elections, which would then throw off all of our elections. And in a federal election year, that would just, could be very much a disaster. So we would just, ask that you give us enough time to do it. Like I said, we haven't really had a chance to digest this bill yet. At first glance, it looks like we can do it, but it's, that's if nothing goes wrong. And so we would just like to have more time to look at it and, if possible, more time to implement it. Rushing leads to errors and mistakes, and we cannot afford to have mistakes in an election. We like to test everything and never test anything in a live election. We test it before, then we go back and fix what we find, and then, test again. We like to be extra careful that we don't discover mistakes and errors during the election. So that's our concern. If we did it in 2026, we would have no problems whatsoever, and we would be happy to implement it. It's just, that's our only concern really is the time frame. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to tell you that.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Before you closed, while I had stepped out for a second, there was a discussion regarding an amendment to the bill, and I believe Representative Newell wanted to bring that amendment now. So, Ms. Lowry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Newell offers up set 45. It is available online. It would be on page 12, line 18, after commission and before the office, insert an and on page 12, line 19, after Senate, delete the comma and delete the remainder of the line, and delete line 20 and insert a period.
So, Representative Emerson, you have any thoughts Representative Newell, would you like to comment on your amendment?
Press the button.
There you go.
Thank you.
Try it now.
Thank you. It is just addressing the concern that I brought up. Well, one of the concerns I brought up during the question, it was about the judges and not wanting them to be along voted by party, since they should not be working by party or shouldn't be serving the state by a partisan line. It should be a more test akin to the statute and jurisprudence. So that is what it is, just removing those 3 levels of judges: Supreme Court justices, appellate court judges, and district court judges.
Okay.
I'm allowed the author. You have a comment on the amendment?
Yeah, I mean, we would obviously like the bill to stay in its current posture, how we have it. Currently right now, our judges do run and have a party affiliation. If this legislature would like to discuss not having that at some point, I think that's a different bill, but that's what we do, and it's certainly the choice of me and the co-authors and other members I've talked to that they remain in the bill.
Thank you, Representative Emerson. Representative Wright for a question on the amendment.
Is it time to object? Do we have an objection yet to the motion?
We do not. This would be the appropriate time.
I'll object.
Okay.
To the motion.
Any other questions on the amendment? And just to clarify, the amendment takes out 3 levels of judiciary. Representative Newell has proposed that amendment. Representative Wright has objected to the amendment. So we're going to go ahead and call roll. So just to reiterate, a motion in favor of the amendment removes those 3 levels of judges. A vote against it does not and leaves the bill in its original posture. So, Ms. Baker, if you please call a roll.
Would you like to go first? Chairman Boyer?
No.
No. Representative Billings? Yes. Yes. Representative Boyd? Representative Carlson?
No.
No. Representative Carter?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Carver?
No.
No. Representative Farnham?
No.
No. Representative Gadberry? No. Representative Johnson? No. Representative Larverdane? Yes. Representative Lyons?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Marcel? Representative Newell? Yes. Representative Shammerhorn?
No.
No. Representative Thomas?
No.
No. Representative Wright?
No.
No. Representative Weibel?
No.
No.
There's a,
We have 5 yeas and 9 nays.
I'm trying, people. This button keeps on and off. Representative Billings wants to make a clarification on her vote. Billings?
Clarify my vote to make it a no. All right, there's 4 yeas.
First week, man. Yeah, first week.
There's 4 yeas and 10 nays.
So there are 4 yeas, 10 nays, and the amendment fails to pass. So we're back on the original bill. Representative Emerson, if you would like to close on your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I know I probably shouldn't look at Twitter while I'm doing bills, but I do enjoy the musings of Twitter. X. X, Twitter, whatever it is. So I just, and I'm not upset about this, I just wanted to further clarify something. So I talked about how most states have a party primary system, and that is certainly the case. Again, there's a mix of closed, open, semi-closed, semi-open, all kind of different things. Everybody does it differently. But most states do have some type of party primary system in the whole country. And it's my opinion, and certainly people are welcome to disagree with me, but it's certainly my opinion that when you are electing somebody for your nominee for a party, it should be those members of that party that do it. And if the individual party decides that they would like to change that, that's certainly their prerogative. So that's why we chose to go with this situation. And then certainly also want to add, look, Secretary Landry and I have served together in the legislature, obviously been friends for a long time. So I appreciate her comments, and I certainly will continue to work with their office. We've done so on this bill to try to get to a point where we're trying to make things a little bit better. We worked on a lot of amendments last night to do so, and we'll continue to work with their office as well, and certainly have a deep amount of respect and appreciation for everything that they do and their comments. So that's all. I think we've kind of gone back and forth on this bill. I know Representative Newell would prefer if we debated it a little bit longer, but I think we've kind of gone back and forth and talked about this enough. And so I would certainly like to move this bill forward, and would hope that somebody on the committee would agree with me.
Representative Emerson, Representative Weibel has made a motion that we move this bill forward. Is there any objection? Forward with amendments. Excuse me, there is no amendments. Oh, the original, we have the original packet, the technical amendments. Thank you. Appreciate it. We've had a little bit of time between those technical amendments and now, so forgive me. So he's made a motion to move House bill forward with amendments. Representative Newell objects. Okay. Ms. Baker, if you'd please call the roll.
Chairman Boyer?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Billings? Yes. Yes. Representative Carlson?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Carter?
No.
No. Representative Carver?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Farnham?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Gadberry? Yes. Representative Johnson?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Larvadane? No. Vice Chair Lyons?
No.
No. Representative Marcel? Representative Newell? No. Representative Shammerhorn?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Thomas?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Wright?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Weibel?
Yes.
Yes. There are 11 yeas and 4 nays.
I'm going to vote of 11 yeas, 4 nays. House Bill 17 is be reported favorably. With amendments. Thank you, Representative Emerson.